Stand out. I'm Jessica Denson, and this is Lights On. I want to welcome everybody who's joining me here on the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. Yes, you have noticed correctly. This is no longer on Midas Touch. I'm going to discuss why Lights On is going to be now exclusively on the Jessica Denson YouTube channel and not Midas Touch moving forward. So just as a matter of housekeeping, if you're not already, please subscribe to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. Also, please follow me on Blue Sky. I have officially stopped posting on Twitter and am doing my work to divest myself of that platform completely. So thank you to all of the new followers on Blue Sky. It's a wonderful place to be, and I hope you follow me in that decision to leave Elon Musk's platform. But listen, everybody, we are going to tackle today this most vital subject that I think is being ignored by the media in one of the greatest media malpractice episodes of the past several years of the Trump era. To think that we are about to have a man who is constitutionally disqualified from taking the oath of office, sworn into the office, his initial act as president will be a blatant letter of the law violation of the Constitution. And we are scared to even have a conversation about whether he actually won for fear of being called conspiracy theorists or being compared with Donald Trump in 2020. As my guest a couple of days ago said, it was actually the election deniers who had access to software that was used in voting machines in this election that raises, this is just one of the alarms, but possibly the most documented and most solidified reason for just doing reasonable due diligence into this election to make sure that nothing was compromised, that nothing was a foul. All that most of the people in this conversation, and there's a lot of theories out there, we're going to drill down into some of them today, but all that most of the people in this conversation are asking for is due diligence. As I said a couple days ago, we are not asking for an insurrection. We are not organizing paramilitary groups. For God's sakes, we're just asking for the due diligence to make sure as we steamroll into authoritarianism with a convicted felon and adjudicated con artist who is linked up with the world's richest man who has a technical empire of his own, that these forces backed by Russia, documented by the FBI to have been behind over 80 bomb threats in Democratic precincts on Election Day, that these forces or something else did not make something off about the election results. All we're asking for is due diligence. A lot of you have thought that the recount deadlines have passed. They have not completely passed. So I'm going to give you what I know about those deadlines today. And it is my great pleasure to be joined again by one of the signatories on the letter to the vice president at the White House, this letter that was alerting her about security breaches to voting machines. And we spoke, of course, the other day with Susan Greenhalgh of Free Speech for People. Today, it's my great pleasure to be joined by Duncan Buell of the University of South Carolina. He's the Chair Emeritus, NCR Chair in Computer Science and Engineering. He's been covering election security and delving into these issues for years now. Duncan, welcome to my first independent episode of Lights On. My pleasure to have you.
It's a good thing to be here. This is an important issue, and we need to work from facts and not just theories and allegations and whatever. So,
absolutely.
I'm a scientist. I live with data.
I love that. And that's where I want to work from today. If for those who are not familiar with your letter, and I'll put it up on the screen for a minute just so we can be reminded of what it looks like. You and I think half a dozen others signed this letter, including the head of the computer science department at Brown University. Can you just refresh us on the content of this letter and why you believe that hand recounts are necessary?
We know that post-2020, the entire election system for Dominion was taken. I won't use a more forceful word. It was taken in Coffee County, Georgia. And then it was posted on an internal website by a security firm that did not keep track of who actually downloaded all of this system. We know that comparable data also from Dominion was uploaded from Mesa County, Colorado. And so the assumption has to be that if there are bad actors, and I think we need to assume there are bad actors, they have had the Dominion software for 3.5 years, and that's 25% more or less of the entire US. We know also that the ES&S system was given over to election deniers in 2020 or 2021. ES&S is 45% of the market. So if there are bad actors, they have had 3.5 years to look at the system, create a clone, look for vulnerabilities, and find ways to exploit the vulnerabilities. And we know there are some bad actors out there. Some of them may be inside the US, but we certainly can't expect Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran to be immune from the enticement of figuring out what to do if the systems have been hacked. We also know every time any of these election systems has been looked at in detail, they have been found professionally lacking in quality. I've never seen ES&S source code. I've seen all kinds of problems with ES&S that can only come from the fact that the software clearly was not done to what I would have considered a professional standard in a 3rd semester undergraduate course.
Wow.
And we have Alex Halderman's report for Dominion in Georgia for the Curling v. Raffensperger report, which is quite similar. I mean, his report says, what would be the 10 or 12 vulnerabilities that a senior level undergraduate in computer science would look for? They all exist, and in the unredacted report, he details how they can all be easily exploited. So we don't have any confidence that the systems have the bulletproofing necessary to be resistant to attacks. So I said this earlier to you today. It's a little like giving over my final exam to the admin in the department and her putting 50 copies of it outside my door in the hallway. If that happened to me, I would rewrite the exam.
Right.
To me, that's due diligence, and we're not seeing that due diligence.
I want to pick up on a couple of things you said. Now, you're talking about how vulnerable these systems are, and I know that, I believe anyway, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have been among election security and data science experts who have been advocating for better security with voting machines to remove even, you know, we're going to address in a minute an AP article, and I'll pop it up on the screen right now, that is seeking to debunk what it says are election conspiracies about Starlink being linked to rigging the vote or being linked to these machines. But what I think you and I were discussing earlier is that even though they say they don't connect to the internet during voting, there is software, and forgive my layman's ignorance on describing this in a better way, but there is software in these machines that, if manipulated, could connect it to the internet. Am I right about that?
Sadly, it's not usually software. It's almost always hardware.
Hardware,
Most
okay.
computer chips these days have built in the communication part. So what it really takes is somebody walking by the device to be able to connect and upload, change, reboot, do anything. I mean, and I have rarely found election officials not to be sincere, but they really don't understand the vulnerabilities. Uh, and I experienced one of the vulnerabilities in. I was on the Richland County, South Carolina board for 2 years till I moved to Ohio, and I witnessed the IT person essentially connecting the allegedly unconnected central computer to the internet. And when I pointed out he had done that, he was more annoyed than ashamed.
Hmm.
I think this is a problem. I mean, uh, the officials don't really seem to quite understand how vulnerable the systems are. And it's not so. Some of the Starlink stuff is the poll books. And I distinguish disruption from corruption. Corruption is figuring out a way to change the ballots as they are cast. Disruption is a lot easier if all you can do is tell thousands of voters they're not registered, they're in the wrong polling place, they have to go to county headquarters. You will suppress the vote in specific jurisdictions enough to change the outcome. And a lot of the Starlink stuff has to do with the electronic poll books. And
Right. Which is the electronic
that's
version
the
of all of
check.
the people who are registered to vote.
Right.
Right.
And the old paper sign-in sheets, your name is there, you verify who you are, you sign in. Um, and Unfortunately, the prevalence of early voting, which I think can be a good thing, means that the record of who has already voted isn't really there until the day before election day.
Hmm.
Uh, and, for the longest time in South Carolina, the check-in was done with the set of computers that had an independent copy of the VR database.
Hmm.
I think, also with vote centers, you almost have to connect to the mothership because you don't want somebody going to multiple vote centers to vote all day long. So
Right.
it becomes complicated.
Hmm.
Uh, but uh, but I think that's one of the major vulnerabilities for disruption and voter suppression, uh,
Interesting.
which is
I want
different
to
from corruption, which is just changing the results.
Sure. And as you're talking about elections officials, and I'm just remembering all of the hell that Trump and his allies put elections officials through in 2020. And nobody here is suggesting that elections officials were bad actors. I don't think, anyway, right? I mean, what sounds like what you're saying is that they're not aware of the vulnerabilities in some of these machines. Let me ask you, before I wanted to read from this AP article and have your reaction to that. But before I do that, are you saying that in order for there to have been other than disruption in the e-poll books and what you're describing as what could have been a voter suppression effect, would it have had to have been actual physical manipulation of these machines, somebody physically putting something hardware onto these machines to create a hack?
Certainly not necessarily, no. And I think that's that's the problem, and that's part of the due diligence is, uh, you know, the election officials are not computer security people, and they don't understand that. So the other side of it is, one of the people I work with did a study of which allegedly unconnected election systems were in fact connected. And about a third of the places he pinged were in fact connected to the internet.
Wow.
And, and there are a couple of states that modem in results on election night. The modem is over a phone line, which is really the internet. And those things can be intercepted. I think I mentioned to you that what we think of in security is the watering hole principle. the predators hang out at the watering hole because they know the prey have to get water. On election night, everybody knows when to go ping in and change things. You don't do it 2 days before election day. You do whatever you're going to do on election day, and everybody knows exactly when that is.
Yeah, target for sure. So let me read from this. You've kind of addressed a little bit of it already, but I want to just read from this AP article that is attempting to debunk what it calls conspiracy theories. And here's a quote. It says, "It is not possible that Starlink was used to hack or change the outcome of the US presidential election," David Becker, founder and executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, wrote in an email. "This quite simply did not happen and could not happen thanks to the security measures we have in place. And these conspiracy theories echo other disinformation we've heard over the past several years." Becker further explained that the country's nearly 10,000 election jurisdictions use a wide range of voting machines that are not connected to the internet while voting occurs, and that nearly all votes are recorded on paper ballots, which are audited by hand to confirm the results of electronic tabulators. If anyone tried to interfere with the machines to rig the election, it would be discovered through multiple means, including reconciling the registered voters who cast ballots with the number of voters, as well as the audits. Now, I'll turn this over to you, Duncan, but to me, it's just making your point, because all you're doing is calling for hand recounts to make sure nothing's a foul.
Well, so I would argue for hand-marked paper, because then the voter knows exactly which bubbles the voter is filling in. I would argue for scanning at the polling place, because then at the end of the day, you get a lot of tiny numbers, and it's a lot harder to throw an extra box of ballots on or off the truck going to county headquarters. And it means that you really only have one piece of equipment, the scanner, that you have to test, not 8 or 10, the ballot marking devices. We know that voters do not check the text coming from a ballot marking device, very small fraction. So whatever the text is, they don't look at it. And the assumption is that when there is a discrepancy in the text, most of the time the poll worker will attribute that to voter error and say, "Oh, you tapped the wrong box," and spoil that ballot and let the voter go back and do it again. It seems to me very rare that if an attack were done properly, it would be such a pattern that the elections people would say, "Oh, this device has to be shut down." Usually, in my experience, when the devices are shut down, it's because the touch screen has gone out of calibration and people are seeing a different box go in. Are they connected to the internet? The trouble is, in some jurisdictions, they modem results in. Do they really do a serious audit? There are only a couple of states that do a serious statistical audit. You pull the paper, you count by hand until the statistician tells you you have counted enough ballots to be 99% confident that the overall result is correct. You don't necessarily have to do a complete hand recount, which would be something of a disaster. We saw that in Georgia in 2020, and they did 3 recounts. I think none of the numbers came up the same, but they felt they were within the margin of victory.
They were close.
They were close enough.
Yeah, I mean, what it really just all keeps coming back to me is why not do the due diligence of a hand recount? I know I asked you this question earlier, and you were not specifically aware of this, but I see it literally in the comments as we're speaking, and I have gotten hundreds of comments like this on the previous video. I've seen them on social media. I know other people have posted evidence of this, and that is that people are casting ballots, and it appears that their vote is not showing up in their voting history. They're just not seeing the record of their ballot being cast. this alone to me is extremely troubling and something that I think warrants further investigation.
Yeah, I think so. As I said earlier, the actual tallying of the vote is supposed to be of something that is anonymous. So by the time you get to just the paper, it should be difficult to go back to who it was that cast that vote. As I said earlier, when all of the data in South Carolina was public, I went down ballot to somebody running unopposed, and I wrote in the name of the girl I had a crush on in 7th grade, because I knew her name would not appear anywhere else, and it would let me find my ballot in the data. But in jurisdictions that don't publish the individual votes, it's not possible to do that. And it's certainly possible to feel that your vote has been accepted, but tallied correctly is really hard. And this is part of why it's not like going to an ATM where you get a receipt and there is a trail of where the money was and now is. Once the ballot goes in, it is supposed to be anonymous, which argues much more strongly for any and all possible ways to guarantee to the public that things come out as they are supposed to come out.
Yeah, I think what people are saying is, and you're describing a difference between saying it's received versus it's tallied, but I think people are getting, what they're sharing is that their ballot has not even been received. It appears that when they send it in, or when they've actually physically gone to a polling place and voted in person, the record does not show that they have voted. But Duncan, I want to you and I had this conversation. We also talked about some data from Stephen Spoonamore, who obviously his duty to warn letters have been circulating. He talks about what he says is evidence of a large number of bullet ballots or drop-off ballots where votes were only cast for Trump and not cast down the ballot. I know your research in a few precincts in Washoe County and in Clark County, Nevada, has at least shown, from what you see, that those numbers might not necessarily be accurate. You've seen some different numbers that would not show such an anomaly of bullet ballots. But to just erase any doubt, and knowing that we had these breaches from malign actors in 2020, would you, I believe you told me you would earlier, you would continue to reiterate your calls for hand recounts at this point, would you not?
I think that's necessary. Public confidence in the elections has to happen. And I think there are huge issues. I have done 80% of Nevada's vote, and the bullet ballots for only one candidate are 0.6, 0.66%, which is what we normally see, something less than 1%. Spoonamore for Nevada is claiming 43,000 plus 5.5% of the entire ballot for the Republican candidate, which comes to something over 80,000 votes. And I've looked at Clark and Washoe County, Nevada and Las Vegas and Reno. The other counties are like 20% of the total. And to find another 75,000 bullet ballots there would be like a 30% bullet ballot count. It's just not believable. I've tried to get the next three biggest counties, and I haven't, this afternoon, I haven't been able to get their data. But I'm actually looking at the individual votes in a spreadsheet coming from these two counties. I think we need a statistical recount, because I think it's important that the public believe in the results.
Yes.
And I've also been a big believer in as much transparency of the data as possible, because if someone is going to cry foul, they're going to have to base it on the data. And somebody else can look at the same data and come up with perhaps counter arguments. And you're not just going with polling or statistics or estimates or, a political scientist's history of understanding things. I'm a scientist. I deal with the actual data. And I would like to see that. I have some data from Georgia. I have some data from Nevada. I may be able to get data from Arizona.
Yeah. And the point is that in most of these states, and I know in the states that Free Speech for the People and yourself and the others who signed that letter requested, these are states that only Kamala Harris as the candidate can request the recount. And as I mentioned, a few of those recount deadlines have passed. They have passed in Wisconsin and Nevada. That was on Wednesday. Today was the deadline in North Carolina, although that was not one of the states where your letter requested a recount. However, the deadline has not passed in Michigan. In Michigan, it's within 48 hours of the state canvass of votes, and the latest, so that makes the latest possible deadline 11/27, November 27th. So 5 days from now is the latest possible deadline for Kamala Harris to request a recount. And Duncan, a lot of people have said, just do one state, so that there can be assurance if there are anomalies, hopefully they would show up in one of the swing states. All of these swing states went for Donald Trump. And with everything that we know about this man and the threats that he poses to democracy, it came as a massive shock to many of us. So just do a hand recount of one state for public confidence, as you said. But Dr. Duncan Buell, thank you so much for joining me today on Lights On. I really, really appreciated your insight and data.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I've been at this election stuff for 20 years, so.
Yeah, and your only interest in this is having the results be accurate and reflect the will of the voters, I would think, right?
And to have the public trust.
There you go.
Every biennial, I would publish my results, and I would get phone calls that say, "Oh, something horrible went wrong," and I would go look at the data and say, I don't see anything. I see machines working all day long. I don't see problems. Again, I think if the data is available, then it makes it a lot easier for the public to trust what's coming out.
Sure.
I will quote Carolyn Cernich, was election director or maybe clerk of court in Humboldt County, California, Eureka. On a phone call with her in 2012, she said, "I don't ever want to have to tell my voters, just trust me."
No, exactly. Absolutely. And to be afraid of this because of optics is the worst kind of motivation not to do due diligence. It's the opposite. It is pro-democracy to do a recount, to do something like this. So thank you very much, Duncan, for joining us today. And we will continue to follow this. I really genuinely hope and will continue to shine a light on this, that the Harris campaign has the courage to follow through with at least one of these recounts. And at least in Michigan, we know that window of time still remains. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So everybody, I will tell you, some of you have said, Kamala Harris doesn't watch YouTube, but you all have done an excellent job of sharing the interview that I did the other day with Susan Greenhall. I even went to the lengths of making a contact with the one person from the Harris campaign who I was in contact with before the election. I said, at the risk of being thought of as taboo, I'm going to share this with you as a concerned citizen. And I genuinely hope that the campaign is paying attention to this and understanding that there's millions of Americans out here who are not conspiracy theorists, who have genuine concerns. I wanted to share just a couple of the comments that you put to my earlier interview. One of you said, "Thank you for your magnificent support for the recount for nearly 2 weeks. Multiple women, especially, have realized something is very wrong with this election. Never doubt your intuition. Thanks, Jessica. My family and I live in a reality-based life. We are not conspiracy theorists. This is why we kept to ourselves. It's extremely hard not to notice." Someone else said, "Thank you for stepping up and finally addressing this and not ignoring the issues. The media, both mainstream and quote unquote pro-democracy YouTube is doing a disservice to the American public. Thanks for covering. So I will continue to cover, and I know a lot of you have asked, why am I not anymore on Midas Touch? And I, of course, put that in the title because I want to share that with you and be very transparent about why I am on my own channel now and not on Midas Touch. And as you might have suspected, it has a lot to do with the subject of this podcast. But I just want to step back for a minute. I want to step back for a minute. And if you're new to me, if you're seeing me for the first time today, I just want to kind of tell you how I got here for a second. I obviously have had a podcast on Midas Touch for almost 2 years now. Never intended to be a podcaster, never thought I wanted to be a podcaster. But I was involved in a very successful legal battle against Donald Trump, one that was never mainstreamed by the media. It was an extraordinary journey of a woman, me, having sued Donald Trump without a lawyer initially and eventually invalidating every single NDA that was signed by his campaign in 2016, by staffers on his campaign in 2016. And so Midas Touch, through a mutual friend, was one of the first outlets to cover my story after it had been essentially shadowed for almost a year. And they rightfully saw great value in sharing this story and promoting it, and invited me on the network a few times as a commentator during the January 6th hearings. And I got overwhelming feedback from people requesting that I start a podcast, requesting that I put my voice out there more. And ultimately, Midas Touch put my show up. I created Lights On, and I started it with Ben Meiselas, who is one of the brothers on Midas Touch, as you know, and eventually transitioned to having other guests. And then, as you have probably noticed over the past several months, I've been doing the Friday shows solo. And I will be honest with you. I have probably felt for some time that it has been right for me to transition off of Midas Touch. If you are familiar with me and my show, you know that I am a very independent person. You know that Lights On is very unique and independent. And I know that I have spoken about topics that have not generally been covered by other shows on Midas Touch. And I know that from you. You tell me, for instance, about when I discuss the Middle East, that this is a subject that has been largely ignored on other shows. However, I have never been told to not cover a topic on Midas Touch, never been told that something is off limits. I've had feedback and we've had differences, and that has most certainly happened, but I have never been entirely censored from speaking about something. Well, the week after the election, I had some doubts initially, like a lot of you had, and felt like at least the right thing to do would be to do our due diligence of making sure that everything was right. And I was seeing talk about audits. Now, the thing about our conversation today is that one of the things that letter points out, which is in the description of this video, we don't have time for audits. Frankly, we just don't have time for audits. By the time that audits would be done, it would be too late for certification. That's why it's so important to request recounts. So, but in the initial days after the election, I was thinking audit. So I tweeted out something about a forensic audit in probably 2 days after the election. And then the Friday of my first show after the election, I found out that Jack Smith was apparently wrapping up his cases. And I tweeted out something about how that was a capitulation that I did not think was right. I'm actually going to put these tweets up on the screen. So one says, "The free world is on the brink of collapse, and we are going to take this lying down. We won't stop. We won't storm the Capitol. That's not us, but we must demand at a minimum a forensic audit of the election results." And then the one about Jack Smith said, "The Supreme Court has shredded our Constitution, and Jack Smith will cave in to the tyrant in advance." I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the tiny text on my screen, and I have to bring it up somewhere else so I can. Sorry, guys, 1 second. Okay, so again, the one about Jack Smith said the Supreme Court has shredded our Constitution and Jack Smith will cave to the tyrant in advance over a DOJ policy, complete and utter abandon of the people, justice, and the rule of law. So those two tweets. By the way, I've since interviewed Professor Lawrence Tribe, who said that what Jack Smith is doing, if he is in fact doing this with wrapping up these investigations in advance, is, quote, abdication of the worst kind. So happy to be in good company there. But apparently these tweets prompted a phone call from Ben at Midas Touch, and he did not want these narratives on the network and was going to take my show down that Friday. And there was no way I was going to let that happen. There was no way I was going to abandon the audience, the wonderful audience who's been so supportive to me, and I know was counting on hearing from me after the election. There was no way I was going to abandon them on that Friday. And so I had a conversation with Ben. I will be honest, I told him what he needed to hear to make sure that my show did not come down. And I did speak about my concerns. Some of my concerns were mitigated from some of the data that I was seeing then. And to be honest, I feel like I've seen more data since then that makes those concerns more alive than they even were then. But I walked a line. And I did my show again the following Friday, and I continued to walk a line. And I can't do that. I can't do that. It's not right for me to be one person to you on Midas Touch and be another person in real life or on my own YouTube channel or anything else. And as I said in the open to this, I think this is one of the most vital stories that is being shadowed by the media, and it is complete media malpractice. And I know if you're coming here from Midas Touch, you know that Midas Touch tells you that they are combating the mainstream media, telling the truth. Truth is golden. And I just feel like this is a vital, vital story in pursuit of truth that requires absolute fearlessness and may be the most vital story of the next who knows how many years, that it may come up in years from now when it is way too late to reverse the damage that is done, that something was afoul. And we may have resources just to do our due diligence. And people are afraid to have that conversation for fear of being labeled conspiracy theorists, fear of being compared to Donald Trump in 2020, which we are nothing like. I want to address also, some of the things that are out there are particularly gaslit. And these are from people that I would otherwise normally completely respect. You guys know David K. Johnston. He's written books about Trump. He's been very clear about Trump's corruption and who this man is. And he was on a podcast with, I believe, Mark Thompson. Maybe getting his name wrong. I believe it's Mark Thompson. Talking about some of the issues we talked about today. And he literally framed concerns about the validity of this election as mental illness. Mental illness. He said the mental illness of Donald Trump was transferring to his opponents, and that it's mental illness to question or have concerns about this election. And I thought that was some seriously sick gaslighting. And this is absolutely not mental illness. We are literally dealing with a convicted felon, someone who has been fined hundreds of millions of dollars for defrauding the people of the state that he did business in, coupled with the world's richest man who has enormous technological access, FBI documented bomb threats on election day, specifically targeted to Democratic precincts. And we are mentally ill for thinking that something might not be right. So sorry, that is far, far, far from the case. And I'm here to correct that narrative to anybody who is putting that out there. There is going to be so much gaslighting. There is going to be so much capitulation. If you're like me, you look at the shit show of Trump nominations and cabinet picks right now, and you're like, spare me the Trump show 2.0. Spare me this bullshit, because it is all like a constant distraction from what's right in front of us right now. We live through this already. We live through this. And it seems like much in the media, and maybe some in the media that tell you that they're different, are just going to be covering this circus the way we all have. And frankly, it's just, it's obviously not working. We have to stand out. I said stand out at the top. I read this to you at on the other video that I did with Susan Greenhalgh. I want to read it again for anybody who's here new. This is On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. Everybody is quoting the first chapter, which is essential. Do not obey in advance. Very, very important. This one is also extremely important. Stand out. It says, someone has to. It is easy to follow along. It can feel strange to do or say something different, but without that unease, there is no freedom. Remember Rosa Parks. The moment you set an example, the spell of the status quo is broken and others will follow. So I'm doing that. I am standing out in my own way, in the only way that I know to be true to myself. I've tried every Friday on Lights On to bring you something that I feel like you're not getting somewhere else. That has always been my objective, not just to regurgitate what is already out there, but to bring something fresh, bring perspective that you don't already hear. And so I will continue to do that here. And I want to just, by the way, there's wonderful people working at Midas Touch, wonderful people, contributors, wonderful producers. I want to thank them, and particularly Jeremy and Adam, who have helped me produce that show, and the brothers for seeing the value in my story and sharing it when others did not. And for all of the Midas Touch community who has been such a beautiful, beautiful support to me. I'm sure many of you are here right now. I just want to thank you all, and I want you to know how much I appreciate you and love you. I love you. And I want you to, I feel like I've said this in other words in the days since the election, but I feel like the next 4 years are really going to separate the sheep from the goats. And I think it's incumbent upon each one of us to really be independent and, yes, be part of a community. Yes, support one another. Yes, don't fracture your coalitions, but maintain your independence, maintain your mental freedom. And I think from that standpoint, we can best combat these forces that are going to be so egregious and such a violation of our rights. I was at a screening this week for The Apprentice, which is, of course, the movie that was made about Donald Trump and his connection to Roy Cohn, and met with Sebastian Stan and Gabriel Sherman, the writer, and Ali Abbasi, the director. Sebastian, of course, plays Donald Trump. And I'm going to play a clip for you from a Q&A after this screening, because I thought this was really applicable to a number of the things that we talked about today. So here's this clip. Caveat, Sebastian Stan was not talking about recounts, not talking about leaving media networks, but the topic of selective thinking, as you'll hear him discuss, I thought was a good lesson for us all.
By us pretending that certain things don't exist, you know, if anything, all I've been looking at is how selective thinking has sort of been dominating everything. You know, I mean, today, seeing the whole thing, we were talking about Morning Joe, whatever you want to say about that, but it's just, you know, if we're becoming a society of selective thinking and convenience, and, you know, which unfortunately a lot of that is true, then I guess I get worried about that, you know, and we have to try to somehow look at the things we don't want to admit.
Yep, we have to look at the things we don't want to admit. And he was talking in particular, I think, when he was describing that, about looking at the character of Donald Trump. And if you've seen that movie, it humanizes Donald Trump, but I think in a way that you cannot mistake his character. And to the extent that it humanizes him, it serves to me for people not to be afraid, and to understand this man's whole life has been a pretense of power. As I've constantly repeated, it is a pretense of power, that ultimately, if we are really on the side of truth, and on the side of light, we can have dominion over. Not necessarily in ways that we know ahead of time. I want to play another clip from Sebastian talking about how he reacted to this time, this moment that we're finding ourselves in.
Quote I read recently that said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And I think I've been thinking a lot about this indifference because it's easy, to be indifferent. And I just wonder whether this is the time where we should be indifferent. Is this the time really where ignorance is bliss? I don't know. I mean, it's too soon to tell, right? Because we're looking at kind of the reaction to these past few weeks and so on. But I know for me that I don't want to live in indifference. I also can acknowledge that I may not always know the answer.
Yeah. So indifference is not an option. I think if you're here, you must agree indifference is not an option, or you wouldn't be engaged. And also, what the last thing you said, I may not always know what to do. And I think a lot of us are dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and that is okay. That is okay. I'll remind you from my legal battle how much I did not know how things were going to unfold every step of the way. I did not know. All I knew was that I was starting from the correct principled place, from the place of truth, and I wasn't willing to waver from that place, to move from that place. I have to share this with you. I almost forgot, but I'm glad I didn't. This is from the Bible. And if you know me, you know I'm unapologetic about being a Christian and taking back the banner of Christianity from those who hijacked it. And I read a Bible lesson every week. And this was in the lesson on election week. And I thought, wow, how unbelievably timely this is. This is from Ecclesiastes. It says, "If the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses." So don't move from your place. Very, very important. I want to highlight, you've noticed already today, we're not doing the normal coverage of the horse rat race, whatever, of Trump nominees, but I do want to point out some good work, some really good work that has been being done in the line of justice, and highlight some really dangerous things that are happening that you can call your senators about right now. Let's start off with HR 9495. Now, I did an interview with Noah Bookbinder that's up on my YouTube channel. You can watch that. He describes HR 9495 in detail, what this bill is. It's a very dangerous bill that seems to have one positive part, and that's suspending IRS collection status for U.S. hostages overseas. Okay, that's all well and good. But the second part of it allows the Treasury Secretary to arbitrarily designate nonprofits as terrorist organizations and strip them of their nonprofit status. Extremely, extremely dangerous. Timothy Snyder writes about how authoritarians use the pretense and pretext of terrorism to quash dissent. So they reintroduced this bill in the House this week. It failed last week. It passed this week. And I just had that list up there of all the Democrats. Shame on them. 15 Democrats who voted for this bill in the House. And right now, it will go to the Senate to be passed. It wouldn't need too many Democrats in the Senate. So call your senators, urge them to vote no against this bill. Extremely, extremely dangerous. We're going to see a lot of egregious attempts to quash dissent in the Trump administration. And this is one. He hasn't even taken power yet. And you've got Democrats trying to help him. Unbelievable, unbelievable. But one thing, as I mentioned, I have not been shy about, and that is the subject of the Middle East. And I want to shine a light on the people who have clarity about what is going on. This week, senators, including Bernie Sanders and Senator Van Hollen, Senator Jeff Merkley, and Senator Peter Welch introduced a bill to block part of the $20 billion weapons package to Israel there were 3 resolutions that were part of an effort to stop offensive weapons being sent to Israel. These weapons, of course, are being used in violation of U.S. law to absolutely decimate women and children, cause an apocalyptic humanitarian crisis where people are starving to get to death, have unthinkable amputations without proper medical care. The crisis in Gaza is absolutely unspeakable, and the fact that our government has been supporting it is a stain that will remain. And I talk about a fountain having to pour forth either sweet water or bitter. It can't do both. And I feel like this is one element of the Biden administration that if they had only had the moral courage to do the right thing here, in spite of whatever interference or anything else there was, they could have won this election. And instead, our government has been funding a genocide, and that there's, again, a lot of gaslighting going on, that if you dare criticize it, you're anti-Semitic, or this is ridiculous. Some of the leading people against this genocide are Jewish. What Benjamin Netanyahu has done to Gaza is not a Jewish endeavor. It is a power-hungry, human, corrupt endeavor. And it is not in the interest of Israeli security. So I just want to commend, even though that bill failed, I want to commend the senators who signed on to parts of those 3 resolutions: Senator Sanders, Senator Merkley, Welch, Warren, Shates, Van Hollen, Kane, Markey, Heinrich, Smith, King, Ossoff, Hirono, Durbin, Shaheen, Ray Lujan, Warnock, Murphy, and Helmy. So thank you to those 19 senators who had the moral courage to say, we cannot be violating U.S. law anymore. The Biden administration has had the leverage, and what a tragic shame that they have not used it against this Trump-like figure, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been committing genocide for power in Israel and against the will of his own people and his own, God help them, hostages that have many who have died in captivity, and some who are still remaining in unthinkable conditions. So thank you for the people who have the courage right now. I think we need to shine a light on them now more than ever. And of course, this week, there was more courage shown from the International Criminal Court. They issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as Hamas's military leader Mohammed Deif, and alleging that they committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's already reporting that Donald Trump will threaten to sanction the lawyers who are involved in issuing this warrant. We'll continue to shine a light and support those who are pursuing justice in all areas. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today on Lights On. I really, really want to thank you for coming over to my channel. And if you have questions, I will do my best to answer them in the comments on this YouTube video. So put them down there. I'll do my best to answer them. I really want to thank you again. As a reminder, you can find all things about me at thejessicadenson.com. So if you're watching this, if you got to the end and you're still like, who are you? Go to thejessicadenson.com to find out more about who I am. You can also support my work there, support my legal battle, which is ongoing against the Trump campaign at thejessicadenson.com/donate. We have some merch. I'm giving up a lot of income to do this independently, and that's okay. I mean, I need the income, but this was never about money for me. It's always about doing what is most effective. And that's really what I am looking to do moving forward, is find the way that I can be most effective in this fight. And not just, I never was a content creator. I'm someone with a voice and a perspective and experience that I understand has value to you and needs to be shared. And I come to you with that perspective. And so I will continue to look for ways to be most impactful in what I am sharing with you. And as you know, I spoke to you before the election about this. I'm still writing my book, and I know that will be a very significant and important for you and for me. So I'm going to be spending a lot more time finishing that. And I think we should all do that. You know, check what you're giving your energy to, check what you're giving your attention to, really, really take care of and love yourself right now, and be fearless, be independent, stand out. That's what will save us. Standing out, having that moral courage. It is a rare commodity, but it is what we so desperately need. So thank you so much, everybody. Please like, please subscribe. Please join me next Friday, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, right here on the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. And as always, let your light shine.